Yeah, so I'm, as you said, Mike Bisaya from Telegeography. I head up the data science group at Telegeography, but I'm putting on my analyst hat today to run this panel, and we'll be moving into the sourcing discussion. So this panel, picking your partners, strategies for the infrastructure manager. So we have a number of great panelists up here. I'll do a quick introduction, and then I'll ask them to go down the line and say a little bit about their role and what they're bringing to the table here. So we've got Stefan Schneider from Comcast Business, Laurent Zimmerli from Open Systems, John Ish from Orange Business Services, Shweta Gupta from State Street Global Markets, and Kevin Gallo from U.S. General Services Administration. So Stefan, we'll start right down here with you, and maybe just a quick intro to you and your role.
Yeah, thanks very much. My name's Stefan Schneider. I work for Comcast Business, been with them for about a couple of years. I lead their software-defined networking platform, productization, and virtualization efforts.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shweta Gupta. I run procurement and vendor management at State Street Global Markets. I get hounded every quarter about why I spend so much money on technology, and I'm responsible for running the infrastructure budget for an array of fintech products.
My name is John Ish. I'm the director of the network practice at Orange Business Services. My day-to-day is visiting customers and talking about where they're going with their network and how we can help them get there. SD-WAN has been, if you took those 5 letters out of my vocabulary, I probably wouldn't say much, but that's what we're talking about with customers. And Orange is a global service provider, so all of our customers are global in nature.
Thanks. My name is Laurent Zimmerli. I'm heading product marketing with Open Systems. I'm glad that people like Shweta are spending so much money for technology. So my view that I bring to the panel is also from the service provider perspective. So we're a global provider of secure SD-WAN services, a little smaller than Orange Business Services. So that's the view that I can bring to the table.
Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Gallo from the General Services Administration. We also spend a little bit of money for technology and telecommunications. I would suspect the U.S. government is the largest enterprise buyer of wide area networking services. And much of that is purchased through GSA programs. Last year, approximately $3.8 billion of telecommunications and related IT infrastructure services were sourced through GSA contracts. We saved the government hundreds of millions of dollars through that and using our contracts. And right now it is a exciting period of time to be in the federal government in this space, because we recently rolled out the Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions, or EIS, program, and all of the government is in the process of transitioning from legacy contracts over to the EIS suite of contracts. And of course, concurrent with that, there's a lot of movement towards cloud services, looking at optimizing networking, modernizing that, and the ever-present focus on cybersecurity. So my team and I are in the middle of this. We're involved with developing and managing the contracts. We also manage some back office systems and support for things like expense management and data analytics. And we're working with other departments and agencies, from the largest ones like Department of Defense to your smallest Marine Mammal Commission, 5-person office, in helping them meet their networking needs.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. So I want to start this conversation off with at a relatively high level, starting at the very beginning of a sourcing round. And I'm going to direct this, for starters, to Shweta and Kevin. When you are starting off a new round of sourcing, how do you start that process internally at your companies, and what are you what are you actually judging the individual providers you might be working with on? How do you start to frame that discussion?
Okay, I'll start this off. From our perspective, most of what we put in place is contract vehicles for other agencies to use. So that's a little bit different the approach that we take there. But we also work with the other agencies when it comes to their sourcing and their use of our vehicles. So a starting point, of course, is to know what your service inventory is, what you're using today. But then take that and knowing where are you wanting to go to in the future. What are your needs there? So to see what services and options are available, what the market space is. The networking, of course, is not in as a vacuum with the rest of your IT. As the increased usage of cloud, knowing the applications that you're using as an enterprise, that all impacts your needs. What we've been talking about with SD-WAN and all these various options and security, all those are factors in to where you're going. And so that comes into what your requirements are. To use an RFP process. RFI, information, part of your market research. Again, seeing who the providers are in that space, what the different options are, what the different pricing options are, what the different price points are. To think about how you want to segment your buy. Is it where you want to buy your access separate, or you want to manage services, how you want to bundle these things? Are you going to want to move up the stack more? Are you going to want to have cybersecurity? Is that going to be procured additionally, or do you want that also with some of your network purchase? Looking at mobility there, and is that a separate purchase there? So to look at that, look at segmenting your spend. And then ultimately to go to an RFP or set of RFPs there. Now during your source selection itself, price, obviously a major factor consideration here. But even there, you have to be, knowing you're going to want to do something similar to an as much as possible, apples comparison. So you're comparing the price of the services, you're comparing other things like the T's and C's, what the SLAs are associated with the services, other different term commitments associated with that. So even there for the price component. And other aspects also. The support structure you're going to be getting with that. What about the management? What about the escalation? Escalation for that. The customer service aspect. The experience and who you're going with telco or other provider, and what their experience is at scale for the type of scale that you need. Certainly a consideration for some of the agencies we work with, and there are thousands of sites. And being, the providers that they have there, and I'll let Shweta add even some of the other considerations here.
The unpopular opinions, I'll go with that first. Like, the first thing you need to understand is how much money does someone have to give you to run certain product of theirs, and I find it strange to understand, but I find it so much easier to go to a CFO and ask them money for product development than the actual delivery of the product. So again, I mainly work in the fintech space, and I think that understanding, like, do you focus your budget on the product and product development, or do you also allocate a significant part of it on product delivery? Like, how key is that to your commercial success? I think you go about having a better sense of that even before you start looking at providers and deciding what you're going to do. So I think that is step one, a clear decision internally about how much are you going to spend on product delivery, because that's going to make a direct impact on the tier providers that you're going to use and the kind of service that you can provide even to your organization internally. The second thing that I like to talk a lot to my internal stakeholders is understanding where they are with their general ledgers. Like, nothing more fun than that discussion. To understand how much, what are their baked costs in terms of how they're running their technology at the current moment of time, because you are departing from one model of spending money to a different one. So if you're in asset depreciation, pretty early on in schedule, you may not have a lot of flexibility in switching providers entirely. On the other hand, I think it's also a really exciting time for somebody like me, because we've seen our major telco providers, a lot of our software and hardware providers working together on very cohesive solutions where we've got flexibility from doing everything ourselves to opening discussion about, okay, can we do some equipment buybacks with them? Are they willing to do do more than they have been doing historically for us? And usually the answer is yes. Just one more point to add to this. I think for somebody like me, it's easy to do simulation and heat maps to see, where is my exchange picking traffic? Where are my fintech services sitting when it comes to the internet? And I realize that not every organization may be able to do so. But in the case that you are, I think it gives you such good planning metrics on what incumbent providers you should go with, who you should look at in terms of providing your underlay service or more of connectivity in certain regions, because you are still trying to pick up traffic as close to where it is being generated.
So in that, I'm just curious about you talked about depreciation and that kind of thing, and I assume that what you're seeing from all of us more is as a service model, so you're not, the capital expenditure isn't there. Some of our customers love that, some of our customers hate that, and I'm just curious what your opinion is of as a service model where you don't own any of the equipment and you're just buying a service from us.
So unfortunately, I come from the world that we own
You're right.
100% of everything, right? But again, this doesn't work for every product. Like
Right.
there are a lot of more nascent products where, I mean, they might come from a very well-established shop, but they are not certain how they want to scale
Yeah.
the economics of, like, even with like bandwidth consumption, right?
Yeah.
Like that particular group, their allocation is, I don't know how much to give you because I don't know what I can do for it. And I feel like they're moving to an OpEx-based model where you subscribe and you scale up. It works in the most meaningful way.
And I think I've seen that with cloud moving. Cloud is always that way, and that I think has pulled back into the network space. So then our inclination is to move towards that model that is not OpEx related. But anyway.
I do want to open it up to Orange and Comcast both here a little bit. We heard a lot about the kind of requirements and the challenges that the buyers are facing, and having just heard that entire discussion, how much visibility do you usually get into that decision-making process? I'm sure you probably want as much as possible. And B, once the provider comes to you and you start seeing what their needs are, how do you approach breaking that down into and mapping it to your own service stack and what you can actually deliver? Because that conversation point starts becoming one of the first touch points and one of the most important ones.
So go ahead. You go first.
Yeah, I was going to say, for us, since we mostly deal with the U.S. footprint, right? It's pretty easy. Conversations tend to center around, bandwidth, SLAs, access types. There is a lot of newer discussions as people start to consider that broadband's a good enough and then sometimes better replacement to legacy networks like MPLS or even more legacy networks like TDM-based services. But a lot of these discussions tend to happen. We will receive an RFI. We will go back to you. We will say, hey, look, this is what we can actually do for you today. We will try to kind of read the tea leaves and figure out if there's something else that you might not be telling us because you're not going to reveal all your cards. But based on what we see with other customers, we might actually give you some references to say, hey, you're thinking of this, the rest of the industry is moving this way, how can we help you move this way? Are you actually interested in moving that way, or you have no interest in any advanced services? How much is over the top significant to you versus completely integrated? In my space, in my product space, which is mostly virtualized, it's a very interesting conversation because customers come to you with an RFI or an RFP that's 100 pages long of how big they want to occupy their racks. And you come to them and say, well, you don't need to do that, and here's the cost savings that you have by virtualizing this infrastructure. And it suddenly starts spinning the conversation in different ways.
And I think, just to add on to that, I think when we get an RFI or an RFP, the frustration that we get is around the spreadsheet in the back of that, because it's very prescriptive, right? It has column, and a lot of them come in and they say, don't change anything. And we have a lot of experience in deploying, especially when you talk about SD-WAN and cloud. We've got a lot of experience in doing it for both very large, medium, small-sized customers, retail, a lot of different industries, a lot of different ways that we can deploy it. And they're not specific to Orange. It's a spectrum of what we can deploy, but they're specific to you. But you might never have done an SD-WAN before, and you've got a design that's very prescriptive, and it may not include virtualization. There are a lot of other things about how are you getting to cloud, what does your security look like? Yep. All those things, if we can sit down with you and help you with what the possibilities are from a carrier perspective, that's a much better position than put a number in this column and don't touch the spreadsheet.
Yeah, and often if you look at the spreadsheet kind of RFPs, often just talking about items, right?
Yes,
About specific
yes.
items, but it's not talking about the outcome, right? That's also what Stefan mentioned. So I think the key is to have the conversation about the outcome. Okay, what do you want to achieve? What is that your business is asking for? What do you need to deliver in terms of outcome, but not in terms of like technology, right?
And the reverse of the bad with the defined spreadsheets is when so RFI, and then as a result of the RFI, we go in and say, okay, this is what we think, an RFI with don't give me a spreadsheet, pricing spreadsheet in an RFI. And then we can come in and say, okay, this is what we understand your infrastructure to be. There are questions. I was just in a meeting 2 weeks ago with a customer doing exactly this. This is what we understand your requirements to be. But to your point, there may be some goodness here that you're missing. Yeah. Did you think of doing things this way or that way? We just received that RFP last week. And it was a lot more flexible, I think. The RFI was very strict, and the RFP was much more, hey, tell us what a good idea is. Yeah. And I think that's where you can benefit from our experience versus, pigeonholing us into your experience.
And I will add one more thing, and this is, for the audience. If you send out an RFP, I don't think that anyone likes to spend this money just for the sake of having blinking lights in the data center or, looking at a screen and seeing, ooh, graph. Right? There are business problems that you're trying to solve. You have stakeholders that you have to report to or be accountable to. Write that in mind. The easier it is to understand what your business problem is, the easier it is to actually come and say, hey, you know what? What you're prescribing us is not exactly going to solve your business problems tomorrow. It might solve them today, but it helps have a much better conversation around, where you want to move, where you can get, optimization, where we can improve things, where we can throw more bandwidth versus less, change access technologies, virtualize part of the stack, do it managed versus unmanaged. Like it opens a conversation that's a lot more valuable to you as the recipient of that infrastructure than, it is to get, the ingredients of the menu and not the meal.
Well, you said one of the magic words there is managed versus unmanaged, and how that bit of the conversation comes in. What are what kind of things that I'll turn this back to the buyers again? When you're looking at a DIY kind of approach, Shweta, I know you do a lot of DIY in your team. What kind of how is that linked to your core business? What about the business that you're running might push you down a DIY path or more of a managed path?
So actually, I'd like to answer that, but first talking about when you should go with the managed service provider. So I work with various types of infrastructure groups. My own does mostly DIYs because of the amount of control we need. But I also work with infrastructure groups that have moved to a managed solution. And being woken up by 300 Nagios alerts is not everyone's idea of a fun Monday. But it kind of becomes, it is the truth when you're running everything by yourself. And the way I look at it, I think, to what you said earlier, like that understanding whether you want to function on a CapEx model or an OpEx model, that actually is a decision-making factor. Because if you're in the space where you want to grow a little bit more organically and scale by seeing, develop how your traffic patterns are developing, how your business is growing, the entire geography of the conversation, I think you are better off moving to, either a semi or a fully managed solution. So, finance right there coming in play about, how much money do you have to spend and what is your schedule at getting approval for spending that kind of money. Also, in terms of the, just the infrastructure team who's going to run your network, right? What is your objective? What is your focus, right? If the focus is that, okay, I don't want to be in the day-to-day space of dealing with the network connectivity issues, opening trouble tickets, like worrying about every little thing, including, the client experience on connectivity issues, and you want to focus more on the applications, focus more on the security policies. I think you're, again, better suited to sit within a managed solution. And as someone who's delivered services in Guatemala and the rice fields of China, right, I would not recommend, going to try and figure things out yourself. So in markets where regulation is still something that's, not fully processed, and you're dealing with an incumbent, I think you are better off moving to this model. Now again, but if your love now gives alerts and just are okay with, dealing with this entire stage where you work from proof of concept to procurement to post-procurement, installation, monitoring, growth, and then looking at how you're going to scale your network every 3 to 5 years, I think DIY works really well, especially because it will give you that edge against your competitors because you are investing in creating an incredible amount of value through service delivery. I think this is something that, to me, is a given in my experience. I think it also works well where you're in a situation where you're consuming an incredible amount of bandwidth, but restricted to fewer geographical locations where the market is mature, your incumbents and your providers, they've got a lot of experience in delivering the kind of services you're sourcing for them. It works really well, and this is the kind of place where you have to be comfortable with taking 3 to 5 years of depreciation for very expensive load balancers, firewalls, a lot of storage, monitoring and virtualization software for a significant time on your books, and just making that capital and human investment.
Kev, I might open up to you. I mean, I think you probably buying at scale at GSA. I mean, what do you have a perspective on managed versus unmanaged, and how do you approach that discussion?
Yeah, well, you touched upon it there when you were talking about focus. Where you want to focus and how much important control is there. And a lot of talk about SD-WAN, and I think yesterday there was a little comparison of costs between the unmanaged or do-it-yourself type SD-WAN as opposed to getting the SD-WAN as a managed service. And it was about 2 times the price for the managed service. If you get the premium managed service, I think it was 2.5 to 3 times the price was the price point. Very insightful. So you're looking at that. Well, maybe price savings for do it yourself. But of course, it's more than just the cost there. It's going to be your total cost of ownership there, which way you're going to go. So if you're going to, for the managed service, you have to have the staff and the infrastructure. Do you have the maturity to be able to do that as a managed service, to manage it yourself, or would you be better off focusing on other items and having the providers take care of that? Whether the local access providers, even in the United States, for that. There. And as you're considering moves to SD-WAN or adopting SD-WAN, and you're looking at do it yourself or managed, it's a good opportunity to reevaluate the enterprise's posture in general on that topic. So if you're currently in a managed service environment for your networking, going to a do-it-yourself model for SD-WAN is probably going to be a heavy lift. Even though it may be easier to manage, you really have to question your maturity. Are you able to do that? Is the benefit there? And to think about where that fits in with your overall organizational strategy. I mean, is it important for me to have this level of control over this? And also, if you're currently in a do-it-yourself environment, this may be a time to say, we should really be transitioning to more of a managed service environment. In the government, there's been a gradual trend more towards managed services to be able to focus on other mission areas. And in particular with SD-WAN, we've seen the early adopters for SD-WAN do-it-yourself model. The next wave that we're starting to see is predominantly a managed service model, and I suspect some of the initial early adopters that rolled out, pilots and everything is do-it-yourself. They very well may be moving to a managed service model here. I do want to caveat that this is what we're seeing through our contracts, plus awareness of some other government efforts. But there's probably other efforts, especially some of the do-it-yourself efforts, that all we're seeing is maybe the access purchasing. So I don't necessarily have visibility into that.
Yeah, and that's the point. Kind of like my view on this, and it's very personal because I developed the products, right? Is that my products needs to be managed, DIY, need to be able to be managed by a managed service provider or partner but also I'm starting to transition my products into being able to be managed by a machine, right? Because there's a lot of repetitive tasks that you can just automate and be done with it. But what this brings is a conversation about the maturity, but it's not the maturity of your organization, it's also the maturity of your resources in different parts of the stack. You might have the best network admins in the world, but they're not really security people, and they might be able to like ramp up really quickly to that, but they're not gonna be deep experts in security. You might have deep experts in security, they're not gonna know all the nuances of how your network's configured and how you route packets here and where. Right? The people who do the network management might not be really good at application performance management because it's a completely different domain. So focus on the domains where you actually have the expertise, right? And then think about, okay, how long did it take me to gain this expertise? How long will it take me to actually move to the next ring or move, 3 places in the stack? If you get a service like, say, secure SD-WAN with UTM on top, and you get this as a DIY solution. If you have, 5 branches, sure, you can, figure it out and pray that you don't get hacked. But if you're running 1,000 agencies or a financial services institution where there's a higher risk of something wrong happening and it being a serious deal, that's when you have to start considering, okay, do I have that expertise or do I actually want to gain it, or do I want to run the risk and just give it to someone else?
And I think what we're getting here too is the definition, and I may be stealing something from later, but the definition of what managed services means is what I find is we talk to customers, and to some customers, managed service means you tell me if it's up or down, and that's it. In other customers, it means I'll send you an email when I want to change something. Otherwise, I'm hands off on the whole environment. And what we found over in developing our SD-WAN product is we have to be able to accept any one of those, right? So if it's over the top only, and we're just supplying SD-WAN, and you want to build and transfer, so we'll provide consulting, maybe project management, maybe some field services to deploy that globally, we can do that for you. If instead you say, look, my expertise is not in this area, maybe I have guys who are used to going into routers, but I don't have expertise in SD-WAN, rather than ramping that up, I'm going to hand that over to you. Our challenge, that we've accepted, is building this spectrum of services that when we get to know you and know what you're looking for, we can plug you into the right service. And each of those services, when you start with, hey, monitor only, well, then we have very little interest in access to the orchestration platform, right? Whereas you get over to the fully managed, now we have complete control over the orchestration platform, and because we're offering SLAs, we may not allow you any access to the orchestration platform. For some customers, as soon as I said that, I could see people, but for some customers, that's exactly what they want, and we have built our solution so we can be flexible along the way. But I think it goes back to the RFI, and if we don't understand what you want, what you mean by managed services, we may try and plug you into the wrong place there. Yep. And when we come out to the end, all of those have impact on price, right? And which is what everybody cares about ultimately. And so it's really important that we understand what are you expecting in that. And the number one question I would ask a customer who says, where are you in that spec, or when I want to find out where they are in that spectrum, is what kind of changes do you do to your network? What do they look like, and how often do they happen? And in a case where you do a lot, they're complicated, and I'm the only one who's going to understand them, you're probably more towards DIY, right? On the other hand, my network is pretty stable, I don't have a lot of changes, and the changes are only going to be application related or something along those lines, then we'll build a portal so you can make those changes real time to the network without impacting the SLA that we're going to supply around availability and everything else that goes with the SD-WAN system.
Yeah, I completely agree. It doesn't have to be a black or white picture. It's not either you throw it all out to your provider or you keep it all by yourself. Yep. So from my perspective, our customers are more on the more managed, not necessarily fully managed, but more managed service side. That can have 2 reasons, because they have to, because they don't have any headcount or enough headcounts and resources to invest in their own resources, or they just choose to, and they just decide to have the focus on different priorities and to join or to get partners on board to take care of that millions of alerts on that Monday morning, or whatever else is happening in the network. And I also agree that it's absolutely key to understand, again, what's the outcome, the desired outcome. And only if you understand that, then the provider can actually tell you how we can add value to this, to help you to produce this outcome. And this makes it also easier for you. You were in the beginning, you were saying that it's important to compare apples to apples. So the same thing to the same thing. And so if you're looking at an RFP, it's last time I'm going back to that topic. It looks like it's something that you can compare between providers, but then you enter into the discussions and you find out that it's actually different providers can help you in different ways.
It could be apples to oranges.
Well, more importantly, you might be asking us to describe our apples, but really, once we read the RFP, you're really asking for the whole fruit salad.
And
I definitely want to add on a little bit here with the RFP. Don't mean to imply that you do that in a vacuum. You know, especially part of the RFI. I mean, that's to go out there. That's to have these conversations to find out what the possible is, what those alternate solutions approaches are. And there's even ways to accommodate that in your RFPs also, where you allow alternate proposals, saying what your objectives are and how you're going to evaluate them.
So I have a question about, this is something that I've seen sometimes in RFPs, is we get the requirements, the hard requirements in the spreadsheet, and then there'll be another one that says, hey, alternative design. And I've been in telecom for some 30 years. I've never seen anybody pick the alternative design because of the apples to apples thing, right? I know how to compare this. And this may be less, but it's completely different than this. And every carrier that responded had something different in that column. So therefore, I have no ability to really, in my opinion, if I get that third column, or second column, it's usually too late, and it's an RFP, then it's too late, right? I may do great things in that design, but it's going to be too hard for you guys to compare that because it really is different for every carrier has a different idea. Is that true, or what? How do you ever do that where you have hey, here's our design, but supply us something extra?
And that's where it is more difficult to come up with what your evaluation criteria are going to be for the alternatives. One's the easy path. Yeah. Not saying it's the best path, and even for the RFPs, you know, for them to be performance-based there, and you know, another, depending upon what you're buying, is you may be using, you know, in our terminology, a statement of objectives there with some higher level objectives that allow, you know, kind of the maximum amount of latitude for your proposals.
I mean, one poster child for an area that's probably quite hard to evaluate between providers seems to be security. When you're maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the gradation of security options available, some inherent into a DIY. What kind of control can you maintain for setting your own very specific security policies versus going, again, that managed model and really relying on someone and their in-house expertise to someone who would do security all day long, and that is a better level of service for you. How do you approach that? And Laurent, maybe you can speak to that a bit.
Yes, so for us, often actually talk if you look at RFPs or basically the process of talking to a prospect, it all starts with talking about the network, the overlay network, the SD-WAN, and security is not so often the first thing of the conversation and not the starting point. But almost always it ends with talking about security. And I mean, we saw it in one of the polls yesterday. Often it's also one of the network team's tasks to do some of the security at least, maybe not all of it. So at some point, yeah, you need to talk about that. And
I feel like every year we see a case study where someone says, designed from the beginning with security in mind. Is anyone doing that?
Yeah. So I have definitely seen, if I back up, if I was sitting here a year ago, I would say no. And what we saw a year ago was IT running with an SD-WAN design that wasn't vetted by security, or security wasn't engaged. And I could name a couple engagements we were on where we got, a certain way 6 months down the road with the customer, 3 months down the road, and suddenly, okay, let's bring security in, and security says, whoa, what are you doing? This is not, you completely changed our security posture. There is no way this is going forward, and then we got to start all over again. My MO from here forward has been, when we sit down with IT, I say, who's security in the room? Oh, they're not here. Okay, we can have this meeting, but the next time, security needs to be here because, to your point, whether you admit it at the beginning or not, you're impacting the security posture, infrastructure, policy within your environment, and you need to have their opinion right in the beginning. The best way is to have them, security is part of your team, not somebody you bring in afterwards to give me a check mark, because they won't give you a check mark.
Yeah, and I would add to that security is insanely broad, right? So it's not just which security guy you're dealing with. Are you talking about network security, infrastructure security, application security? Are you talking about risk and compliance, auditing? Like, who are you actually talking to? It makes a difference. In a lot of cases, like, we get questions in RFPs or, like one-on-one engagements about security, and usually I would say 3 out of 5 times they're talking about network security and they think that's enough. And then you start questioning them into like, okay, so, who provides your security posture? Oh, we don't have one. Okay, maybe get someone to do that, but why? Right, like this keeps like, rolling into more and more and more deeper conversations that sometimes you as a customer don't have an answer for, right? So, it requires a lot more careful examination. I think security is one of those areas where, like, if you're not asking the right questions to your customer and your vendor, you're gonna end up not with fruit salad, but with, something else. And if you're not really engaging the right resources at the right time, and that sometimes involves having a conversation maybe 2 or 3 levels above the RFP and say, okay, who handles your compliance? What risk can you actually, accept? If I'm selling to government, I know there's, a set of regulations that I have to follow in order to be compliant enough. But usually whenever we do a government RFP, there's 20 pages more of like, do this, don't do this, don't do that, because there is that knowledge in the government. But when I respond to an RFP for, like, say, a small manufacturer, they go like, yeah, I haven't gone through that process. The only compliance that I have is manufacturing, and that's it.
So I also happen to have the good fortune of administering vendor risk for my group. And what I've learned by filling out countless forms is that security is actually key to a conversation when you're trying to onboard a vendor, because corporate security really wants to know how data will be viewed, transmitted, what form it's going to be through with the vendor's network. Like, how are they sitting alongside your network? What reach do they have, right? I think that's such a critical component, and I think going into any kind of design or purchasing scheme without having that laid out on the table, it's not the best use of either party's time.
And it gets into, from a global perspective, of course, you talk about China, India, Russia, there are requirements, and especially when you start talking about using the internet as a medium for your network and accessing cloud directly. You have users in China who need to get to cloud services. Well, you could use internet inside the country to get there, but their experience is not going to be good. Mm-hmm. And now you need to figure out, and that goes with regulation, which may not be your requirement, right? You may not have any requirements around internet inside China, but we do, and we understand them, and we can bring those to the market. So that's, I think when you look at it, there's a couple different ways to look at it. To your point, mm-hmm. There's layers within the customer, but there's also layers within a geography that you got to look at.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to adding security to the discussion, it's not only about technology, it's not only about the ability to encrypt or to deploy a firewall, it's also about the processes. And also if you talk about, or if we come back to the question, how much are you going to have managed and how much are you doing yourself, think about how your teams are actually going to talk to each other. Who is going to talk to who is responsible for what, and how can they team up when it comes to troubleshooting? Or how can you bring if you have your own SOC, how can you bring your SOC, for example, into the whole equation, because there's a lot of information from the network and from the security parts in the network that is relevant for them, and on the other hand, they are delivering relevant information that you want to have back in your network design. And just what you said before, because of the use cases, I think it's true that most of the use case or the success stories were deployed with security from day one, but probably not planned from day one.
Fair distinction.
Do gentlemen see that differentiation in implementation when it comes to North America versus EU because of their data protection and privacy laws? Do you just see a whole shift in what your clients ask for and how you respond to it?
I would say that there's a lot more awareness of that, but it's really about data storage for the most part. But we have to be cognizant of that, and when we look at, much like you said, before you bring a vendor on, you have to validate the security. We have the same exact thing, right? So where is data stored that the system uses? Is any of that data user identifiable? And how do you treat that data once it's stored? So those things as a global service provider, every country we operate in, we've got to maintain that. Russia just rolled out some new rules, I mean, it's a year ago now, but any information that can be identified as a Russian citizen has to be kept inside the country. So now, that data, that deep data you can get out of your SD-WAN device, can you identify your user? Where is it stored? And does that break that rule? So those are things that we consider when we're picking technology to say, how is that going to impact our ability to operate globally? We don't have a domestic network that we're stretching international. We're international right to begin with. So all those things come into play.
Yeah, and I think it's different for different countries or markets how they pick the partners. In Germany, for example, we see a lot of customers who really want to have a single partner, who want to have managed it all by one dedicated partner. Other countries generally prefer different partners for different areas.
And that's a good point around managed service too that I meant to make before, is that just because you're thinking of it as a managed SD-WAN solution doesn't mean every service that lays on top of it is managed as well. And we see customers buying managed SD-WAN, but managing their own security infrastructure as an example. So that's a scale thing. When you get into virtualization, those things start to get a little confusing, but generally speaking, that's how we see it.
Great. I want to make sure if there's any questions from the audience, we save a little bit of time here at the end. It looks like there's one back there. And a microphone's coming for you as well.
Thank you very much. I just have a question. When you were mentioning about the RFPs and the Excel spreadsheet and everything, just inquiring about the role of consultants and system integrators. Are you seeing, do you deal with them? Do you see the role growing, diminishing, and how's your experience with that?
So, growing. So we see more and more consultant-led RFPs. Our intent is to get closer to the consultants, and we've made a concerted effort to do that. So it's not about the first time the consultant has ever worked with Orange is this RFP they just handed us. We wanted them to understand our services and understand what we can bring so that they're more informed when they go to you and bring this possible solutions to you. I will say an irritant that a consultant brings to us, you can't talk to the customer during this process, you can only talk to me. Okay, that's fine, but if we're talking about this process of I want to understand your business requirements, some of the consultants have a very good understanding of that. Others say, I need the spreadsheet. And that can be problematic for us.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're actually in a weirdly unique position in which, a lot of our sales come from what we call our indirect channels, right? And those are consultant-led, integrator-led, managed service provider-led, engagements. They handle the relationship with the customer, but that doesn't mean that we just treat them at, hey, you're over there, you deal with this, here's my products, here's the price, see you later, right? We tend to collaborate with them as the deal requires. Some deals are pretty simple, other deals are more complex. I don't think that role's ever going to disappear, because as you start making your networks much more complex, they become more complicated as you start bringing more functionality into what was essentially just a highway for packets, and you start adding, security being a great example, but now that, say, if you take voice, security, and just your general data together, that becomes much more complex than it was in the past. As you're adding content-based options, as you're adding new applications, as you're adding automation, you're going to have to start bringing people who actually keenly understand those domains, right? And they don't necessarily happen to exist within your organization. So, happy to partner. To the point, yes. Easier if we actually start talking about what the business objective is and not, just how much margin you want to get out of the access. But, it can lead into really, really, really good customer engagements.
All right. Anyone else from the audience? All right. Well, if not, join me in thanking our panel for a great discussion.